Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business, brought to you today by MegaPixx Media. Joining me is Dan Kelly, who is President and CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. Thanks, Dan, for joining us again.
Happy to be with you.
Okay, we're in the middle of an election, a federal election. What are some of the things that you as an organization are looking for from the federal parties, in their platforms as we move along this campaign trail?
Well, there's a lot that small firms are looking to the parties to see where they're at. One of the big issues, of course, is related to the pandemic. It's some acknowledgement from the political parties that the economic effects of the pandemic are not over. And the reason the businesses are worried about this, of course, is the federal government has already started to close down and phase out many of the pandemic-related support programs like the wage subsidy and rent subsidy. The CEBA loan program, for example, is now entirely closed. But these economic effects of the pandemic are still very much ongoing. Their customers are not flooding back to small businesses. At this stage, if you can believe it, less than 40% of small businesses are seeing the normal levels of sales that they're used to. Beyond the pandemic itself, of course, the next big issue is, and I certainly saw this when I visited Alberta a couple of weeks ago, is the shortage of labor. It's a giant issue. It does you no good as a restaurant or a retail shop if you are not able to serve your customers when you have them. Getting your customers back is tough enough, but then if you're not able to serve them and earn an income, that makes it even harder. And so many businesses are struggling to pull their teams back together. That is another big issue for our members. So lots of stuff that small businesses are worried about. And of course, the parties are only now beginning to put forward pieces of their campaign. The Conservatives, of course, did put out their entire platform just a few days ago.
So let's talk, first of all, about the pandemic-related stuff. What do you hope to see, from the next government? As who knows, by September 20th, we may be into a fourth wave in this country. So what is specifically would you like to see the new federal government? And I say new because it is going to be new no matter, if the Liberals come in or not. It's still a new government. So what would you like to see from a new government?
Well, first is that they acknowledge that the economy is going to need a lot of work, and that we're not only going to need to put in place a host of short-term initiatives to try to get things back on track, but also send some positive messages to try to get the long-term economy in better shape than it is today. So we are really anxious to see where all the parties stand with respect to prolonging pandemic-related support programs, like the wage subsidy and the rent subsidy. And just last week, that the Liberals and the Conservatives both put forward elements of their campaign that respond to that. So I was encouraged by that the two major parties did put forward different, but certainly approaches to try to recognize that there's going to be a long tail to the COVID economic effect. So that's a big one for us. Whomever's in power is going to have a lot of work to do to take away some of the debt levels that small businesses have faced. You and I have spoken about before. $160,000 on average is the amount of debt that a small firm in Canada has taken on. And those bills are going to drag many into bankruptcy, even as the economy is reopened over the course of the fall.
Well, let's talk a little bit about those labor shortages. And we have chatted about this before, but it's funny because I see it now everywhere. And I see even different groups, organizations talking about this issue. What do you like to see from the federal parties when it comes to labor and employment? What kind of things can they do?
Look, it's going to need attention from both the federal and provincial governments. Provinces have played a huge role in this as well. Look, it's very easy for guys like me to talk about the effect that the CERB had, or now the CRB stream under EI is having on the availability of labor. And there's no question that it is having an impact. But it's not the only thing that is going on. So one thing that parties need to do, all of them, is to ensure that they have a plan to wean Canadians off of the passive COVID-related income supports and get them back into work. So that happens, for example, right now, the CRB stream under EI means that you are paid $300 a week, regardless of your pre-COVID earnings. And so for part-time workers, this is often a better deal to stay home than it is to get to work. Yeah. That needs to change. We need the program to continue for those that don't have jobs, but for those where the employer is recalling them, they need to make sure that you're getting back to work, or at least not paid as much or more sitting at home. Yeah. But it's beyond that. We need public health officials and governments, including federal parties, to start sending the message soon to Canadians that it's time to get back to work, time to go back to your office, time to go back to the theater, to dinner, to travel. And right now, that's not the message that we're hearing from the federal political campaign. The message is, how can we put in place the most restrictive policies possible for federal civil servants? That seems to be the flavor of the day. So I'm not sure. I get that there's a fourth wave approaching. We got to take it seriously. But at some point, we're going to have to figure out that we're going to have to deal with this and find other ways other than just lockdowns and vaccine mandates as the only solutions that we can put in place.
Let's talk a little bit about mandatory vaccines, vaccination, and passports, vaccine passports. Yeah. Where does CFIB stand on these issues?
So we just surveyed our members to find out what their views are about mandating vaccines or some form of vaccine credential or passport being used in a variety of different settings. And it really does differ depending on what we're talking about. But our release today, our statement today, available on CFIB's website, cfib.ca, expresses some caution to governments about running face first into a vaccine passport or mandating vaccines in some fashion. We've got lots of worries about this. I think most Canadians, and our data shows most small business owners, can get their head around vaccine passports being used, just as we're using international passports for international travel. So requiring double vaccination for visitors or for Canadians going abroad, most small business owners are generally supportive of that. There's also some support for using it for large events like the Calgary Stampede or for a big Blue Jays game. I'm going to one tonight in Toronto. So support for that kind of approach, but it really falls sharply when you're talking about requiring small employers to ensure that their employees are fully vaccinated. And then there's more opposition than support for the idea of requiring customers in a small business to be fully vaccinated. Yes, there are some business owners that don't like the idea at all. That's a chunk of our membership, and I get that. But more and more of our members are actually expressing concerns or opposition to this based on the practical concerns. How do you, as a business owner running a busy restaurant, ensure that you've got somebody that's going to go through at the front of your restaurant to make sure that they're looking at this little piece of paper that the person was given after their second shot to determine whether it's legit and whether they should be allowed? And if the customer doesn't wish to be vaccinated, are you going to have that 18-year-old waitress say, "No, sorry, sir, you can't be here"? And what risks do you as a business take on in doing that? These are some of the questions that business owners are asking. They haven't got a lot of answers, including from those that are proponents of a vaccine passport system, and that needs to happen first.
We talked a little bit about the fourth wave, quote unquote. Obviously, if we get to that stage, and it's almost kind of looking like we might, looking at the numbers that we're seeing across the country, starting to spike again, you folks as an organization are vehement, aren't you, in your response to this, that there got to be no lockdowns, right?
Yeah. Look, lockdowns were the most restrictive measure, and that should only be used in the most extraordinary of circumstances. And yes, aggregate COVID numbers are starting to tick up again. But I think some of the public health officials have been saying we've got to stop thinking about the aggregate number of cases and looking at the severity of the cases and whether that's leading to hospitalizations and certainly ICU bed capacity. We have to keep an eye on that. There's no question. Everybody understands that we've got a deadly disease that's still circulating in our country. But what we've got to make sure we do is we don't shut down the economy any further. And even these vaccine passports, yes, there is some support. Most business owners have told us that they would prefer a passport to a lockdown, but even that passport system is an extraordinary loss of Canadian freedom. And
Yeah.
we should be using that only in the most grave of circumstances. So I worry that we're kind of rushing down this road. And I think we've got to put in place other measures. Most employers have said that they are happy to recommend and encourage staff to be vaccinated. 77% of our members suggested that. So these are not anti-vaxxers. These are people that have, I think, legitimate concerns about the mandating of vaccines for either staff or customers, and that needs to be taken seriously. Lockdowns, though, gosh, I'm hoping that policy is flushed down the toilet and will never return.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are feeling the same way. Thanks a lot, Dan, for joining us today.
Anytime, Mario.
All right, super. That was Dan Kelly, President, CEO of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business, brought to you today by MegaPixx Media.